Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this broadcast as you would, or this essay rather, as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about President Trump's announcement that merit is the, not equity, but merit is the basis for deciding, standards, who gets hired and who keeps their job, and the merits of an investment or a project the government's going to pour money into, and so on, that this is the new standard. Now, it won't happen overnight, and there'll be huge resistance in all across the public service and all across the education sector, and all of these that are deeply bought into non-meritorious behaviour. Now, I'm going to talk about a few examples of where lack of merit causes disastrous outcomes. But we can measure the equity programs that have been not around just since the Biden administration in the rigged election of 2020 got in, but it's been around for a long time. This lack of merit, the decline or the relative decline of merit's been going on. It really picked up pace as I saw it probably in the early to mid 1990s, or even the late 1980s. I started to notice it, and it just picked up pace from there. It began in government type jobs and government employment, education sector, school, tertiary education, and so on. It began there, but it spread out fairly quickly through law courts and into the private sector. So now, the first time I came across it, and I've mentioned this in previous videos, was a schoolboy. I got detention one day, and the teachers' union, which was all the teachers at the time, teachers' union thing was having a meeting, and the detention room was right next to where the teachers' meeting room was. It was a hot day, so all the doors were open, so I could hear what was going on. I wouldn't have taken any notice, really. I mean, who cares when you're like 14 or something? Who cares what the teachers are talking about? But because the speeches that were so impassioned, and voices were raised, and you could sort of sense the level of tension in the air based on this topic and they were talking then about equity, and I didn't realize it at the time, and the importance of it and the relevance of it didn't really sink in, but I sort of stored it away in the back of my brain and realized years later what was going on, or could put it into sort of wider context at the very least. Now, the argument was that boys, back in the day, boys were coming first in everything. This was strictly pass or fail exams, and boys came first in everything. In fact, girls hardly ever made it into the top 10, let alone come first. If a girl even made it into the top 10, it was an intake of breath. This was strictly pass or fail exams. Now, these are the teachers that are coming up, and they're saying that if we stay with merit-based exams, strictly pass or fail, if we stay with those, girls will never come first, and we need to address that. So ideologically, there were some teachers arguing, not all, but some teachers were arguing, ideologically, we must have equal outcomes, and we can't have equal outcomes if we have merit. Merit and equal outcomes cannot coexist. Now, this is years ago. I'm in my early 60s now, so I'll give you an idea how long ago this was. So they decided that, or the discussions were that we have to do away with merit. Now, other arguments came back. Other teachers, more the older teachers, the teachers were saying, well, if we do away with merit, it's kind of a slippery slope. Then, if we've got to lower standards, as in do away with merit, in order to create these equal outcomes, then what's the point? Doing away with merit would be equivalent to just pretending that we're all here for an education, and that rigor and hard work wouldn't really matter anymore, because that we're just going to effectively allocate, along ideological lines, first places based on equity. And so the thing raged back and forth, the arguments on both sides, but the agreement at the end which I later discovered, the agreement at the end was that half the subjects, and there were, say, I don't know, eight main subjects, whatever they were, 8 main subjects in the school. Four would be based on merit, and the 4 would be based on merit was saying, well, we'll let the boys have them, and these were things like mathematics and physics and chemistry. We'll let the boys have that, but all the humanities-based stuff, things like English or poetry or whatever, we'll let the girls have that. But it won't. The girls, we won't evaluate those subjects on merit anymore. We'll evaluate it on, or we'll allocate positions based on assessment. And this was the equity. So we're just going to lower the standards. We don't care who does well in the exam. We don't care who comes first. We don't care who comes last. And they added in there that everybody must pass. So there were 2 things. One, that girls would come first, and that nobody would fail. Those were the two things that they really wanted to push. Nobody would fail because it was degrading to fail. And they perceived doing well at school and education, people that worked hard, they perceived that as a prestige thing, not as a hard work thing, not as a brain power thing, but as a social prestige thing. That was something that I remember from that if you're coming last in exam, you therefore have no social prestige if you're coming first. Now, there were sundry arguments, such as people that came from, but this was a wealthy area. So we're not talking vast government tracts of government housing and impoverishment. I'm sure there were people that weren't doing very well, but it was quite a well-to-do area. A lot of kids getting dropped off at school in mama's brand new Volvo and this sort of stuff. Or brand new Merc and whatnot. So that was the sort of place that the school was in. And so this idea that there was an impoverished mass of underclass and they should be looked after, that was an ideological sort of straw man, because we weren't in that sort of area, or that school wasn't in that sort of area. There was a lot of wealth in that area. Not that everybody was managing director of the bank. There were people there that had ordinary jobs, but typically they'd inherited a free house, so they didn't have mortgages to worry about, those sorts of things. Nonetheless, there were arguments made that what if someone comes from a student comes from a disadvantaged background? Shouldn't we try and help them, give them some sort of leg up or give them some sort of advantage? What about the kid who comes from a wealthy household where the folks buy them all the books and you get everything there? This is pre-internet, obviously. They've got every study aid they need. It's a nice quiet house with no family drama, and they've got their own study desk to work on, and they don't have to, they're not distracted by all sorts of things going on in the house. Why should they have the advantage? So there were those sort of, the world can be a cruel place type discussions. But then how do you allocate the help? So the only solution they had then was just lower the standards, just keep on lowering the standards until you have equity. And that's the rub of equity all over the world, and what the world is paying horrible. The Western world is paying a horrible price for that today. You can measure the wastage and the loss of wealth creation due to these equity programs. You can measure it in the multiple trillions upon trillions upon trillions. It's that much wastage has occurred. And that's where I first discovered or came across it. Again, not that it's the importance of what was going on dawned on me. It didn't. I just thought it was strange. Even as a kid, I thought, how's that going to work? If you had, if passing an exam is irrelevant and makes no difference to getting the first prize, so then that's not going to work out. Even as a kid, I thought that. I didn't need to. No, I wasn't necessarily looking at an ideological perspective, but I could see how it just wasn't going to work, and it would come at great cost. And I looked at subsequent to that. I looked at how it's playing out, how students who were certainly not gifted, and if they even had an IQ of 100, were being gifted first places and prizes and all sorts of things. And kids that would get, say, 5% in the exam, and their final grade would be readjusted, so they got 52%. So again, coming back to this, nobody fails, participation prize type concept. Now let's just jump to a current sort of, and I want to give a real life example here. Now here's a university that has a very large R&D department, and they do produce some quite clever stuff that's almost, always produced by straight white males. You get the occasional Chinese guy or something, and some of the Chinese people, by the way, are very good. They're so super laser focused. Some of their research work can be quite good. So anyway, the Japanese too, and so just having this R&D department. So a few young straight white guys produce this quite clever technology. It's got promise. It can go places. You're looking, oh yeah, they could really do well with this. So they decide that it's such hot technology that they're going to commercialize it. It's not quite finished in the research and development, so there's no product as yet. But they're so excited by it, they say, okay, let's commercialize this. Now, instead of going and getting commercial, competent, experienced people who would know what they're doing, instead of doing that, they decided they were going to do it themselves. There was so much glory to be had here that nobody wanted to pass it up, prestige. And so they got someone out of the accounts department who has only ever been a bureaucrat come public servant his whole life. He's never done anything other than be an accountant in the bureaucracy and just have taxpayer money to spend, no accountability and so on. And they give him the job as CEO of this newly created company that's going to commercialize this technology. Technology does have a lot of promise, so so far I guess so good. But they should have gone out and got commercial people to do it. I mean, did you need to? Do you need to be told that? But this is where this sort of equity and lowered standards come in. They want equal outcomes, prestige chasing, and so on, but not merit based. On a meritorious basis. Now, they've had merit to develop the technology so far, this promising technology, but then as soon as they think they've got something, the merit gets thrown out the window and they don't care about it anymore. So they appoint this bureaucrat. Now, this bureaucrat who I've met and spoken to a few times, he's never done anything commercial in his life. So he's been a bureaucrat since, he went from high school to university, then got employed in the university. So he's only ever been a bureaucrat and then in the public service and back to the university. So he's never been outside of the coddled bureaucracy. And he's in a bureaucracy that employs thousands of people and is very, very sort of hostage to equity type ideology. So he doesn't know what to do. So he just gets onto the internet. And this is the big thing these days. People who know nothing about nothing will go onto the internet and just download a bit of paper and say, I know all about it now. How to be a commercial expert in 5 seconds because I downloaded something off the internet. So he looks at a big multinational company and he fancies, I'm a CEO. Whoa, I'm a big heavy dude. And so, the power and the glory of it just goes to his head. He's drunk, staggering around, drunk with his greatness and vainglorious dreams of what he's going to do. And so he downloads this. Well, these big multinational companies have billions of dollars in revenue. Bear in mind, these guys haven't got a nickel in revenue yet. But the big multinational, they've got executive sales directors and executive marketing directors, and they've got this and operations vice presidents, and they've got so and so, and the blah 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 blah. And they've got this big managerial infrastructure. So that's what I need to do. This guy says. Now, he doesn't seem to understand that infrastructure means that you have billions of dollars of revenue to pay for it. All he's got is a very generous government grant. That's all he's got. He doesn't have any revenue. He seems to, he doesn't give a single thought to how long it's going to take to finish the R&D projects and get the technology out the door, as in commercialize it and generate revenue. No, it doesn't even cross his mind. It's almost like an irrelevancy. And if you've worked for a government type bureaucracy all your life and you've just spent taxpayer money, you don't think that way. There's just an endless river of taxpayer money keeps coming in the door, and the revenue, who gives a shit? So he puts together this infrastructure of positions and managers and executives, executive director of sales and so on. But he fills that with bureaucrats. So again, there's not a single person's ever worked in the commercial private sector. So it's just a whole division business stacked with incompetent bureaucrats that haven't even got the slightest clue what they're doing, but they're all chasing glory and some form of personal aggrandizement. Now, then the HR department comes along. Again, they're very influential in these sort of government type bureaucracies and say, hey, you got too many straight white males in this. You have to have equity. You have to have half the people have to be women, half the people have to be non-white. So you can't get rid of everyone he's just hired. So they just add and create the deputy director of sales and the assistant vice president of marketing, and they fill that full of brown and black people or trans people and gay people, the lesbians. They do the whole equity 9 yards. Now, by now, the cash burn, because remember, they've got no revenues. So the cash burn rate, they've got a massive payroll of over 100 people for an organization that's being created out of thin air that has no revenues. It doesn't even have a product to sell at this point. And they've got 100 people. They're doing what exactly? But who cares? They're all professional bureaucrats, so they're very good at shuffling paper back and forth between. So he doesn't see a problem though. So I meet the guy. This is the second or third time we met, and that I know that they haven't finished the R&D project, and I know about all the people they've hired. Now, on top of that, these people, a lot of whom are from third world countries, the equity and everything, they decide, there's someone from Somalia, for example, they want to go back to Somalia, paid for, of course, by the taxpayer, and they want to swan around and show, hey, I've gone to white man's country. I'm now big man, big man. I'm a big important person. Look at this. Look at all this white man's money I've got to throw around, and look at all the glory. And so now, if they say, well, I want to go back to Somalia, and someone says, no, well, you're a racist. You could even be Hitler. So then everyone panics and they sign off. So they've got also this massive expense structure now. All these third world people are demanding that they travel back to their homeland so they can swan around and big note themselves, which is very much like a third world cultural thing. You go back to big note yourself, and I'm a big man now. So, or woman. So the cash burn rate is off the charts. Now I'm talking to the CEO, this CEO that is nothing more than a professional lifetime bureaucrat, and saying, look, you've got no product. You don't know when you're going to have a product, and there's barely no effort being put into completing the project. By the way, everyone's just running around wanting to sound and look self-important. Your cash burn rate is off the charts. You're going to burn through all the money that's allocated in a very generous government grant. You'll have burned through the whole thing in 8 or 9 months. Now, what are you going to do then? And he was rather irritated by the question, as if it's, well, I'll just go back to the government for another handout. I mean, you silly idiot. And so I said, no, really, it's meant to be a commercial organisation. When are you going to have the R&D? When are you going to have a product? Do you have any idea? If you don't have an infinite flow of money, you're going to have to very substantially cut back on the staff, or fold this new company entirely and hand over the commercialization to a private sector company, a business. There are people out there that specialize in commercializing this sort of stuff. Shouldn't you hand it to them, because they'll be able to do it for a tenth, less than a tenth of what you're spending sort of now. But he was grimly determined to hang on to it. He'd even hired his mistress to do all the recruitment, for goodness sakes. And she was this idiot, another bureaucrat and a moron, and so on. And she's being paid very, very handsomely, by the way, to pretend to be the recruitment manager or something, the recruitment consultant. And it's just his mistress that he's humping on the side and wants to reward for her horizontal loyalty. So this is the sort of thing. Now, how does it wash out? Now, in the end, the government says, we can't just keep on throwing money at this. You've got to show us something. They can't. They then, in a desperate panic, try and just sell the 3/4, 90% finished technology to a private company and say, well, will you do this for us? We'll sell it to you and you can have it, and or you can pay us vast sums of money, which allow us to keep this insane, ridiculous cash burn bureaucracy going. They couldn't find any takers, so the whole thing folded and everyone was out of a job. But no one seemed to care. Interestingly, they didn't give a shit. Hey, I had a good time. I was able to pretend I was a demigod for 6 months. That's not bad. A bit of a break in my boring life. And now he suffered. No one suffered any penalty. He didn't suffer a penalty. He slotted straight back into his bureaucrat's job, and that was it. And then I think it was a Japanese company came along and said, "Look, we'll give you a couple of bucks for it." And there were no takers. It was now worth nothing. All the funding had dried up. So they go, "Okay, you can have that for a couple of bucks." And that was it. So the whole thing now, this could have been, I believe, a very successful technology that could have generated, or could have been the basis for creating a very successful private sector company that employed hundreds of people on well-paid jobs. But instead, the whole thing was squandered. The obsession with equity and the obsession with cronyism as well, of course, but the obsession with equity is what cost the wastage of tens of millions of dollars, and also that lost opportunity. So when we look at the cost of equity, the monumental and brutal cost of equity, then we can see it in two ways. One is through unrealized opportunities such as this, and the net cost, the wastage. Professional people who know what they're doing could have really done something with this, and they could have done the job at far less money than was burned by these idiots. But their obsession with equity and equality and equal outcomes drove them to make the dumbest decisions, and to engage in wastage of in terms of what they were doing, huge proportions. But again, the lost opportunity needs to be costed into this, and this is why equity is has horribly damaged the West, and why merit needs to come back. And as President Trump has said, merit is the basis for making decisions going forward, and it's not before time. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback Challenge. Thank you for listening.